Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Naomi, and today I want to talk to you about the best ways that you can prepare for headstand. So headstand is one of those poses I think that is, kind of ubiquitous in yoga, meaning, we see it a lot and it's sort of like, the pose that people want to do when it comes to yoga, like this big, exciting, fancy pose. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think headstand is a fantastic pose, and I think sometimes it gets a really bad rap because you are bearing weight on your head. And so sometimes there's a lot of fear around headstand, particularly when it comes to bearing weight in your head and the concern about bearing weight in your neck. Now, I could talk a lot more about that. All that there really is to say about that is that it's less about bearing weight in your neck and your head and more about how you prepare your shoulders, your core, and your hips. Now, that's not to say that there's no weight at all in your head. That is not what I'm saying. And there are certain people and there's certain reasons why you should not do headstand. Okay, so for example, if you have fused vertebrae in your neck, meaning any of your cervical vertebrae are fused together, right? Headstand probably should not be in your practice, right? If you have any head or neck or shoulder injuries, headstand probably should not be in your practice, at least not right now, okay? If you have any limited range of motion in your head or neck, headstand is going to be harder, more specifically in your neck, okay? So those are things to keep in mind when it comes to whether or not headstand is appropriate. The same thing is going to be true for, things like if you've just had oral surgery, like going upside down is not a great idea, or, if you have a detached retina, right? There's certain things that are just going to make headstand a little bit less ideal for your body, and definitely do a little bit of research into that first. But if you are healthy and if you are strong, headstand is a pretty fantastic pose to practice if you are looking to add more upside down to your life. Now here's the thing that we need to know about headstand, and this is why I want to talk about it first before I get into some of the poses that will be your best prep poses for headstand. And that is, headstand is a lot harder than we give it credit for. Okay, in some ways people think of headstand as the easiest inversion, right? Like it's the one where you have the most on the floor, so it's easiest to get up into it, right? It's a little less scary than a handstand, right? Because you've got your forearms and your head on the floor. But because of that, you also have less mobility. So that means that you are more fixed in place, all right? So it also means that you need much more strength to get up into headstand than you might think. And it's something that we don't talk about enough in yoga because headstand is so easy to get into. So what I want to talk about are some of the things that you should be able to do first before you can do a headstand. Okay? So think of this as sort of your entry into the poses that you should get really, really good at before you even attempt headstand. Okay? So all that said, let's get started in downward facing dog. So downward facing dog is a pose that you do want to be really great at in order to do headstand because it's an inversion. And ideally, you should be able to hold downward facing dog for 2 minutes before you can do a headstand. So I'm actually going to time it right now. Starting now, we're going to do downward facing dog for 2 whole minutes so that you can feel what that's like in your body. Okay? Now there are a couple of reasons, and I'll just talk through it while you're here. There are a couple of reasons why being able to do downward facing dog for about 2 minutes or so, give or take, maybe even 3 minutes, there are a couple of reasons why being able to do downward facing dog for 2 minutes is a good benchmark for whether or not you're strong enough to do headstand. Okay, so downward facing dog is an inversion. So in addition to the fact that you are already doing what you would be doing in headstand, you are bearing weight in your arms, your hips are lifted above your head, and there's a certain amount of hip mobility, right, that is required to be in downward facing dog. Now, holding downward facing dog for 30 seconds, no big deal. Okay, so far we've been in downward facing dog for 1 minute, and you've got a whole minute to go. Okay, now if you find yourself wanting to wiggle here or move around, that's totally natural. But I would encourage you, if you are working towards headstand, to try to hold this pose a little bit more steadily. Okay, meaning don't wiggle so much, don't move so much, right? Don't shake from side to side, just try to hold it. Because headstand also is very much about steadiness and stability. You can't move your arms around. Right? They have to stay fixed in place. You can't move your head. You can't move your shoulders. Okay, they have to stay pretty fixed in place because they are your foundation in this pose. Now, right about now, as we're getting a little bit closer to 2 minutes, your arms might be getting tired, right? Your legs might be getting tired. Okay, we've got about 10 seconds left to that 2-minute mark. And I'm going to hold us actually past the 2-minute mark just in case, just to give us a little bit more time. So we're right at the 2-minute mark now. But I'm going to give you another 15 seconds. Okay, and the reason that I want to give you another 15 seconds here in your downward facing dog is that headstand is not just about holding a pose, and that's your 15, you can come down, but it's also about being able to come out of the pose with control, right, and skillfully. And so if you don't have enough strength in your upper body to sustain it while you're in it as well as coming out, you need to build up that strength first, okay? So we're going to come back to another version of downward facing dog shortly, but first, let's do instead a wide-legged stance. Okay, so this wide-legged stance is just a wide-legged forward bend, and you can interlace your fingers behind your back. Okay, now with your fingers interlaced behind your back, what you're doing is giving your spine a little bit of a release, letting your head and neck go. Okay, this is also really great because it's, opening up your hips a bit. Your legs have to be quite strong. You can give your knees a little bit of a bend if you need to. But you're releasing your head and neck and just giving your shoulders more work. And you need your shoulders to be active for headstand. So release your arms, that's another pose. Now turn your right foot out for triangle pose. The triangle pose is another great pose to be strong in for headstand. And I recommend, if you're building up to headstand, it's not about moving through a flow. Okay, you do want to be able to do Chaturanga pretty well and some other poses, but it's not about being able to flow through poses so much as holding them. Right? Can I sustain this pose? So squeeze your legs towards one another and turn the right side of your chest up. Okay? And then go to the other side. Lower your left hand down, turn your right foot in, left leg out. And you can have your hand on the floor like I do. You can have your hand up on your shin. Keep in mind that one of the things that's really important for headstand is hamstring strength and mobility. More specifically, you need to be able to get your hips over your head. If your hips and your hamstrings are really tight, headstand is just harder, right? It just is. Okay, so the more movement, the more freedom you have in your hamstrings, and the more strength, the easier the pose is going to be. Okay, so now we're going to transition into another pose that you should be good at if you want to get into headstand. So what I want you to do is turn back to center, bring your palms together. Turn your right foot out, bend your right knee, and lift your left leg up. This is Warrior 3 pose. Okay, now super important to be good at Warrior 3 pose, mostly because this helps you build core strength, which you need a lot of for headstand, but it also builds strength in your hamstrings. Okay, it gives you more balance in your hips, which you also need. And remember, headstand is all about steadiness, perseverance, stability. And as you lengthen out through your left leg, you're creating that same length that you want to have as you extend up through your toes. Okay, so lower your left leg down, lift your right leg back, Warrior 3 again. Okay, so we're just flowing through these poses so that you have an idea of what poses you really want to be able to get good at in order to feel more confident in headstand. Okay, step your right leg back. Okay, go ahead back into downward facing dog. So you're back in dog. We're not going to hold this because the next one we're going to do is Chaturanga. Okay, so come forward into plank and lower down into Chaturanga and see if you can hold it without sagging through your belly, right? You're not halfway to Cobra. Hold Chaturanga, lift up through your core. Super important to be able to do this pose. Push back, downward facing dog. And we're going to do that one more time just for fun. Okay, come forward into plank pose. Lower down Chaturanga and hold it. So this one is a really good prep, not only for Shirshasana 1, but Shirshasana 2, which is tripod headstand. Lower your knees down, pull your chest through just for a little cobra. Okay, and then put your forearms on the floor. Knees down, lift your belly. And then lift your knees up for what I like to call flying Sphinx pose. This is another great prep for headstand because it's building core strength. So basically your body is in the same shape as it is in Chaturanga, only with your forearms down. So you can see why this would be really useful, okay, for headstand. Now put your knees down. And that's one where it would be good to, again, build up strength, right? Maybe holding for 10 breaths. We're starting with 5. Okay, bring your forearms to the floor if they're not already. Interlace your fingers. And as you interlace your fingers, you'll notice that one pinky finger is like underneath the other one. Tuck that pinky finger in and make a fist. Okay, and then squeeze the fist of your hands together because this is essentially the shape that you want your upper body to take in headstand. Okay, so none of that basket business. You can check out one of my other videos for that. No basketing your head. Create a fist with your hands. Okay, now give your forearms a squeeze. Round up through the middle of your back. Send your chest towards the floor. Okay, so you do want your chest to go down. You do want your shoulders to be engaged and active. Lift your knees up. This is Dolphin Pose. And we're going to hold this for, you guessed it, 1 minute. Now, ideally, you would be able to hold this for longer. Okay, Dolphin Pose is a fantastic prep for headstand because you're in the shape with your upper body for headstand without your head on the floor. So again, you're building strength and resilience and power. Okay, strength, resilience, and power. And you can let your head hang here. Okay, so you don't have to look forward towards your hands. You don't have to look back towards your knees. Just let your head hang. And press down through your forearms so that you can activate your shoulders. And you've got about another 15 seconds or so here to be here in Dolphin for a minute. And you will discover that this is harder than holding downward facing dog, which is why I'm starting you with a minute. Okay, and again, I'm going to give you 5 extra seconds to come down mindfully. So you know you can do it for a minute, but now you've hit a minute 5, lower your knees down, and come into a squat. Because doing a squat is also a really great prep for headstand. This is another one of those poses. Now, if you can't get your heels on the floor, your heels can be lifted, that's okay. You could also grab your blanket and put a blanket underneath your heels. Okay? But the reason that you want to be able to do a squat is actually because you have to be able to get low to the ground to be able to do a headstand. Right? In order to be able to get your hips over your head, it's a squat position upside down. Okay? So being able to squat is really, really helpful. Now, like I said, you might not be able to get your hips all the way down. You might be a little bit higher up. This is also okay. But getting the basic shape of a squat is really important. Okay? And then the last one that I want to share that's actually really good, and it's a good prep in some ways if you're working more towards tripod headstand, is crow pose. Okay, now the only reason that I think that it's a really good prep for headstand is not because you can use crow pose to climb into tripod headstand. I actually recommend strongly against that. Okay, but it's because it conveys upper body strength, right? Upper body core strength and hip mobility and openness. Okay, so being able to bear weight in your arms for crow is telling you that you are strong enough for tripod headstand. Okay, so place your hands on the floor. Shift your weight forward, squeeze your knees against your upper arms, and lift your feet up. Now you might have to lift 1 foot up at a time, and you can check out my crow tutorial here as well on my YouTube page, but think of it this way. You want to squeeze your knees against your upper arms to be able to lift your feet up. So even though this is very much about upper body strength in crow pose, it's also very much about inner thigh strength, right? About the movement of your hips, about the lift of your core. So more than anything, it's about confidence in your arms, which is what you also need in headstand, okay? So those are sort of the basic poses that you want to be really good at. And what I want to do really quickly is just sort of show you how all of that is put together into headstand so that you feel a little bit more confident trying it on your own, okay? So I'm going to show you Shirshasana 1, which is this one, fingers interlaced, and I'm going to show you tripod as well, and I'm going to show you the ways to get into it safely and effectively instead of how sometimes people get into it, which is a little bit less careful and safe, okay? So if you want more support underneath your head, you can always make sure to have a blanket. I am outside here on my back porch, which is cement, and it's not super comfortable for my head, so I'm going to use a blanket. So here's the thing. Remember, I talked first about how you interlace your fingers, okay? You want to interlace your fingers. That bottommost pinky finger tucks in so that you make a little fist with your hands. Now, this just gives you a lot more access to power in your biceps and in your shoulders. If you don't make that fist, if you just make a basket and put your hands behind your head, you don't have as much access to your strength. So there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. It's just not as strong and supportive, and it's not going to give you the stability that you want, okay? So you want to make a fist that you can use to squeeze. And then when you go to put your head on the floor, the back of your head is really going to go into your forearms, not into the fist of your hands, right? Your hands don't open up to support your head, okay? They stay together. So you're going to place your forearms down, okay? Similarly to how you get into Dolphin, the only difference is you put your head down first, right? So you round up through the middle of your back, send your chest down so your shoulders activate, and then you place your head on the floor. Now, I like to be closer to my hairline as opposed to the crown of my head because it gives me more of the natural curve in my spine. Okay? Once I'm here, I'm going to lift up. Now, this is the last thing that you really need to be able to do before doing headstand, and it's called egg stand. So what I do is I tuck one knee up and in, and then I pull my other leg up, and that's hip mobility and core strength. This is egg stand. So my knees are tucked really close in towards my chest, and I'm pushing from my chest down through my head and my arms. Then I can draw my knees up, and this is the next important step. So in one of my other headstand videos, I'm going to show you the big mistake that people usually make, which is that instead of lifting their knees straight up first, they go directly from egg stand and then push their legs forward and then swing them up. That's a lot harder. So if you come from egg stand with your knees tucked in, and then you pull your knees together and take your knees vertical, all you have to do is extend your legs straight from there, and you're in the pose. Okay? And then you come on back out the same way that you came in. So knees tuck, and then one leg down and then the other. Okay? So being able to do egg stand first is super, super, super important because it teaches you that you can get your legs off the floor. Now, you can use all kinds of things to help get yourself off the floor. You can grab blocks and put your feet up on blocks, right? So you'd start with your knees on the blocks just to make it a little easier. Forearms would go down, head goes down, and then you would step up. And that's going to just roll you more forward so that pulling your feet up is easier. Okay? You can also hop both legs up at the same time, not one at a time. But ultimately, you're still going into that upside down squat. And that's why squatting is so important. I call it egg stand, but it's an upside down squat with your head on the floor. Okay, so you can use the blocks to give you a little bit more height and leverage. You can hop up if you want, but ultimately, you want to get into that tucked in place first so that you feel the most support. Okay? Now, if you're working towards tripod headstand, there are two ways to get into tripod headstand. I'm going to show you both. The first way, and it's really the same. It's going into egg stand. You would place your hands on the floor, and I'm sliding them underneath the blanket so I have more grip. And then you just make a tripod, meaning a triangle, between your hands and your head. So I'm going to place my head down. Now notice, this is basically the same shape as Chaturanga, and that's why Chaturanga is so important if you want to be able to do tripod headstand, okay? So, head goes down, hips go up, I squeeze in, I'm going to lift one knee and then the other, and then I can tuck my knees, pull them up over my head, and extend my legs. And then I'm going to come back down the same way, okay? And up, and that's one way. Now, what I don't want you to do is climb your knees up onto your upper arms, mostly just because that puts a lot more weight into your head and neck, And it's actually harder to lift up from there, right? Because once you've put your knees on your upper arms, like you've already kind of rested them down on something, so you've got to like heave yourself up. If you just tuck your knee into your chest, that's going to tell you whether or not you're actually ready to lift up into headstand, okay? If you try to lift up into headstand by climbing your knees up onto your upper arms, you might trick yourself into thinking that you're actually strong enough to do it when you're not yet, right? It's a lot easier to collapse down into your head and neck when your knees are on your upper arms than it is when you've pulled your knee up to do an egg stand, okay? And if that doesn't make sense, let me know, and I'm happy to answer more questions if you put them in the comments below, okay? But I want to show you the other way to get into headstand. I'm going to ditch the blanket this time just for simplicity's sake, but it's wide leg, and it's the same premise, right? Your hands go to the floor, only this is a little bit more accessible if your hips are more open, right? If your hamstrings have more mobility, right? Your pelvis has more mobility. So hands go on the floor a little bit ahead of your toes. Head goes on the floor. You're going to squeeze the mat on the floor like you did before, and then you just pull your legs up and they go wide. Okay, and because I'm on cement, I'm not going to go all the way up, but you get the general idea, right? Your legs go wide out, and then you would pull your legs up, okay? So why do I think it's really, really, really important, to think of it that way? When you think about going into a headstand, wide leg is going to be a lot easier if you have more mobility because you have a lot more leverage, right? And your legs are on the sides, it's like scales. Whereas when you pull them up into the tuck, it can feel a little bit harder because, you're working a lot harder to stay even. Okay, so if you have the mobility, going from wide leg is really great because you can feel the balance and you don't even have to take your legs all the way up. You can just sort of feel that shift from side to side. Okay, but keep in mind that's generally only accessible if your pelvis has a lot more mobility, if your hamstrings have more length to them, and just in general, if you're feeling more confident in your tripod headstand. Okay, so those are all the ways that you need to be aware of so that you can prep for headstand, whether you're doing Shirshasana 1, which is headstand 1, or Shirshasana 2, which is tripod headstand. Okay, I hope this has been really helpful in terms of getting you a little bit more prepped so that you can feel more confident going into headstand and so that you know what you need to do in order to do this pose feeling really strong and really stable and safe, but also empowered to try it if you're a little bit nervous to do it on your own. So, thank you for hanging out with me on the mat. Thank you for trying hard things like headstand. Let me know how it goes for you, and I look forward to hearing all about your adventures in headstand really soon, and seeing you back on the mat again really soon. All right, until then, bye. Did you enjoy this headstand video? If you did, and if you want more videos like this month in my online yoga studio, the Conscious Healthy Collective, and in its sister studio, the Collective Light, I am doing practices devoted to strengthening, stabilizing, and supporting headstand all month long. So if you enjoyed this class and you want to get more practices with headstand in them so that you can feel more confident in this pose, upside down, in your core, and just, doing the fun yoga that you like to do, definitely check out my online yoga studio, the Conscious Healthy Collective and the Collective Light. You can get the links for those in the comments below, and if you really enjoyed this, you can try these two studios out, one of the two, for half off this month if you type in the code HEADSTAND at checkout. So that's 50% off your first month for an entire month, just to check things out and see what you think of all these other awesome headstand poses. So I hope that I will see you on the mat in the Collective or in Light this month, rocking your headstands. And until then, I look forward to being back on the mat with you really soon. All right? Bye.